The Ricoh Mirai 105 may just be one of the weirdest film cameras that I've ever used. It looks like an old video camera or a projector of some sort. It's awkward and clunky to use and is a fully automatic point and shoot. So why is it actually quite a good camera? Let's talk about it. The Ricoh Mirai 105 is a 35mm film autofocus point and shoot camera, and it was released in the late 1980s. It's an incredibly cheap camera these days. There's listings currently on eBay for between £15 to £50, and I purchased mine around this time last year for £30, including postage to me. So it is an incredibly affordable option for anybody who's looking to get into film photography with a point and shoot style camera. Now, the Mirai 105 has a zoom lens, which ranges from 38mm to 105mm, which is a fairly versatile focal length, although I would have quite liked it to get slightly wider on the low end to something more akin to a modern day 24 to 105mm lens. This zoom is toggled with a simple switch on the left hand side of the camera. One button zooms in towards 105mm, and of course the other button zooms out back towards 38mm. This zooming in and out is shown in the viewfinder because the viewfinder is actually coupled with the lens at every setting and uses a through the lens system. The viewfinder shows roughly 85% of your final image that appears on the film negative, making it pretty comparable to the viewfinder of an SLR camera. The viewfinder itself is actually quite a big positive for me. It's nice and bright and clear, and it has a clear autofocus circle in the middle of the finder. It also has an indicator for when the camera has locked in its focus point, which will also blink if the camera cannot find a point to focus on. There's also a flash indicator present in the viewfinder as well, so you know exactly when your camera flash is going to go off. And that is because this point and shoot style camera comes equipped with a fill-in flash on the right hand side of the camera. This can be used in an automatic mode, which will automatically fire if there is not enough light or if the subject is backlit. You can of course turn the flash off and not use it at all, or have it turned on and it will fire with every press of the shutter. Whilst the camera is fully automatic in its exposure settings, and so you cannot adjust these, it does have exposure compensation so that you can overexpose or underexpose your images by up to 1.5 stops each way. And the exposure system that is in the Ricoh Mirai 105 is actually a pretty clever one. It's essentially the program exposure mode on a modern day camera. The Mirai 105 reads the ISO of the film that you put in, and it chooses a suitable f-stop and shutter speed for the brightness level of the subject that's being captured. And to ensure that camera shake is less of a problem, the shutter speed will actually not go slower than 1/40th of a second for wide angle shots, and will also not go slower than 1/100th of a second for any telephoto shots. The camera will also fully open the aperture before lowering the shutter speed, so as to not compromise the handheld ability of the camera. And in practice, this did actually work pretty well, but there were some shots in darker places inside in particular where the camera did still struggle just a little bit, and I didn't get perfectly sharp images. The camera is also capable of macro photography, has a multiple exposure mode, continuously auto winds the film between frames, and also has a self timer. There is a surprisingly good amount of technology in this little camera for the price. And I have to say that the images this camera can produce are surprisingly great. The lens is far sharper than I thought it would be, and the level of detail and contrast that the lens captures is pretty impressive. The sharpness remains throughout the range of zoom, and there's only minimal vignetting around the edges of the frame. Admittedly, I do prefer shooting wider, and so the majority of the images that I'm sharing will have been taken at that 38mm widest focal length, or fairly close to it. It'd be interesting to see what this camera's like for portraits, really going up all the way to that 105mm focal length. Maybe that's a video that I'll do in the future. The automatic exposure was always very accurate, and I felt I could trust that 100%. Some of the images that I got back from the lab I would have been perfectly happy with had they come from my Contax G1 and 28mm Zeiss lens setup, and that combo is considerably more expensive than this powerful little camera. As for the shooting experience though, that's where things get a little weird. Firstly, the camera itself is just a very clunky and weirdly shaped little machine. It feels like I'm using an old VHS camera or something like that when I'm shooting, and it certainly doesn't feel particularly premium in the hand. It's quite counterintuitive and not particularly easy to press the zoom button in a natural way. It would have made far more sense for this to be on the right hand side, but I guess it does mean that you don't press it automatically. As for focusing, this is an old focus system. Autofocus cameras had only really just started being manufactured around this camera's release date, and as such, the autofocus can be very slow, and a couple of times it did misfocus from what I was intending. It should be noted though that not all of these should be attributed to the camera. Some definitely should be attributed to me, the user. When in low light situations, the camera really struggles to focus in particular, and sometimes I simply couldn't take a picture because the light was too low and the camera couldn't focus whatsoever. But like I said earlier, if the camera does focus on the correct point, some incredibly sharp images can be produced. Finally, the camera is just very heavy, oversized and bulky for a point and shoot camera. If I'm using a fully automatic camera, I want it to be quite small and compact so that I can tuck it in a pocket and travel around with it easy. This camera really isn't that. It's more cumbersome to use, arguably, than my Contax G1, and the general idea of a point and shoot film camera is that it just makes shooting film easy. Whilst from a technical perspective, this camera is easy to use, from an ergonomics perspective, it's about as far from it as you can get. Overall, the Ricoh Mirai 105 is possibly the weirdest film camera I've ever used, but I kind of love it. It's awkward, it's funky, it's not particularly intuitive and easy to use, it's a little bit slow, but the results it produced for me were genuinely surprising in the best way. It is a cheap way to get into film photography, and if you can look past the usability quirks, it's a great little camera. That's going to be all for this one. Consider leaving a like if you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And if you do want to see some more of my content, please do consider subscribing. Stay safe, everyone. Stay happy. And I'll see you in the next one.